Usually when we talk about diagnosing a problem, whether it's mechanical or medical, there's this comforting expectation of precision.
Right. Yeah, you want to know exactly what's wrong.
Exactly. Like if you're running a marathon and you feel a sharp snap in your leg, you go to a doctor, they put you in an x-ray machine, and a few minutes later, the doctor points to a jagged white line on a glowing screen.
And there it is, the fracture.
Yeah, there's the fracture. It's a visible, categorical, objective fact. Broken or not broken, you apply the cast, you wait 6 weeks, you heal. It is entirely a physical transaction.
And we really crave that level of diagnostic clarity in almost every aspect of our lives, honestly.
Oh, absolutely. We love a clear fix.
Because it gives us a sense of control, over our environment. If we can see the problem and if we can measure its exact dimensions, then we can just engineer a solution to fix it.
But the moment you step out of the physical body and wade into the world of the human soul, it gets complicated.
Very complicated.
I mean, when you get into questions of existential purpose or that quiet, creeping sense of internal dread that just hits you at 2 a.m, suddenly the x-ray machine is useless.
Right. It doesn't show up on a scan.
We are looking at a diagnostic landscape that is incredibly murky here. We have all the symptoms of a profound injury, but the MRI comes back totally blank. So how do you even begin to treat an ache you can't put under a microscope?
Well, it really forces us to confront the limitations of our standard tools, because when you examine the human spirit, you aren't dealing with torn ligaments.
Right.
You're dealing with intangibles like, meaning, identity, and this pervasive sense of incompleteness. And that is exactly where the sources we've gathered today come into play.
Yeah, we have a massive stack of material today.
We do. We are pulling together ancient theological essays, the full breadth of biblical scripture, and even modern neuroscience, evolutionary biology, and philosophy.
So our mission for this deep dive is to isolate and really examine what has been called the God-shaped hole. We are going to look at why human beings are inherently, stubbornly restless.
Yeah, and this isn't just an exercise in abstract philosophy either.
No, not at all. We're investigating why you, listening to this right now, seek ultimate meaning. We want to understand why our species is structurally different from every other animal on this planet.
And how this invisible internal void shapes human society, our politics, our technological pursuits, and really our most private thoughts.
To set the baseline, though, we need to trace the terminology. Where does this phrase even come from?
So the classic formulation of the God-shaped hole is usually attributed to Blaise Pascal.
Okay.
He was a 17th century French mathematician and philosopher. And Pascal was a brilliant scientific mind, but he looked at human behavior and observed that every person carries within them an infinite abyss.
An infinite abyss. That's a heavy phrase.
It really is. His core argument was that humanity tries in vain to fill this infinite abyss with everything around them. But because the abyss is infinite, it can only be satisfied by an infinite and immutable object.
And in his conclusion, that object is God.
Exactly.
But, he wasn't even the first to notice this. If you go back even further to the 4th century, you have Augustine of Hippo writing in his Confessions.
Oh, right, the famous quote.
Yeah, he addresses God directly and says, "You have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you."
It's so profound.
It is. So we have this centuries-old consensus that the human condition is fundamentally defined by a restless search. But I really want to start at the absolute beginning of this narrative.
Where it all started.
Yeah, if this infinite abyss exists in all of us, well, where did it actually come from?
So to answer that, the sources direct us to the biblical account of human creation. Specifically, we need to examine the original architecture of the soul.
Okay, take us there.
In the opening chapter of the Bible, Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 and 27, there is this profound shift in the narrative.
How so?
Well, God has spent the previous verses basically speaking the physical universe, the plants, and the animals into existence. But when it comes to humanity, the language changes entirely.
Right. It gets much more personal.
Exactly. God says, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." And in theology, this is known as the imago Dei, the image of God.
Let's unpack that a bit, because image can be kind of a slippery word. We aren't talking about a physical resemblance, right?
No, I'm not.
Because God doesn't have a biological body with 2 arms and 2 legs that he used as a blueprint. So what does it actually mean to be constructed in the imago Dei?
It implies a spiritual architecture. If you look closely at Genesis 2, verse 7, the text provides a second, incredibly intimate angle on this creation event.
Okay, what does that verse say?
It says, "The Lord God formed a man from the dust of the ground, and then he breathed the breath of life into his nostrils." Yeah, so you have the joining of the purely material, the dust, the carbon, the physical elements of the earth, with the purely divine, the breath or spirit of God.
So he's mixing the physical and the infinite.
Exactly. By breathing his own nature into dust, God created a creature with an absolute structural necessity for the divine.
So it's baked into our DNA, essentially.
Spiritually speaking, yes. The Imago Dei means humans were designed with the unique capacity to reflect God's character and to enjoy a conscious relational existence with him.
So we are built with a receiver tuned to a very specific frequency, which, that completely separates us from the rest of the animal kingdom.
Oh, without a doubt.
If you observe animals, their entire existence is governed by instinct and environmental feedback. They are constantly processing the what.
Like, what is that predator?
Right. What is that food source? What is a safe place to sleep? What is a potential mate? It's all about immediate physical reality.
That is a crucial distinction. A lion on the savannah is entirely content if it has just eaten, if it has a safe territory, and if it has a mate.
It's just chilling under a tree.
Exactly. A lion operates in a perpetual present tense. It is bound entirely by the limits of its physical needs. But humans, we are the only creatures on Earth that ask, why?
We want the context behind everything.
Right. We don't just want to know what the fire is. We want to know why the universe is constructed in a way that allows fire to exist. We ask, why am I here? Why do the innocent suffer? What happens after death?
And, from a purely evolutionary standpoint, this is a massive paradox.
It really is.
Think about it. Biologically, survival of the fittest dictates that every single trait should provide a survival advantage.
It has to have a utility.
Yeah, but how does building a towering, intricate cathedral help a species survive the winter? Yeah. Why do we compose these mournful elegies for the dead?
Which costs us time and energy.
Right. Why do we suffer from existential dread or write complex poetry about our own mortality? You don't see a golden retriever staring at the moon having a crisis about its purpose in the cosmos.
No, you definitely don't.
So if we are just biological machines, these activities are a massive waste of caloric energy.
The fact that we engage in these activities is evidence that our nature transcends physical biology. And the book of Job in the Old Testament actually hits on this exact tension.
Oh, really? Where at?
In Job chapter 7, verse 17, Job is suffering terribly, and he looks up and asks this really profound question. He says, "What is mankind that you make so much of them, that you give them so much attention?"
Wow, that's a powerful question.
It is. The theological claim here is that God intentionally made us to be conversational partners with the divine. Our unique capacity to suffer from a lack of purpose is the very proof that we were built for an environment beyond the material world.
So the suffering itself is the clue.
Exactly. We wrestle with morality, justice, beauty, and eternity because we have an origin point that contains those attributes.
The sources use a really compelling analogy for this. They say, imagine a master craftsman sculpting a beautiful, ornate chalice out of silver.
Okay, I like this one.
The shape of the chalice, its depth, the curve of its rim, everything about it is designed specifically to hold wine. When it is filled with wine, it functions perfectly according to its design.
It does exactly what it was made to do.
Right. But if you take that chalice and you fill it with gravel or sand or dirt, well, it fundamentally clashes with its purpose.
Because it wasn't engineered for dirt.
Exactly. The human soul was shaped by God's breath to hold the infinite. So when we try to fill it with finite earthly things, with sand, it just aches.
That perfectly illustrates the functional design. We are vessels engineered for a very specific substance.
I hear that, but let me challenge this premise for a second.
Sure, go ahead.
If we are perfectly designed for God, if we are this silver chalice meant for wine, why does humanity feel so incredibly incomplete right now?
That's the big question.
If this is a divine design, it feels like a flawed one. We spent our whole lives aching. Why are we walking around feeling like we're starving if the kitchen was perfectly designed for us?
That is the essential question. And the answer is that the ache you feel isn't a design flaw at all. It is actually a symptom of a catastrophic rupture.
A rupture. Okay.
To understand why the void hurts, we have to move from the architecture of the soul to the fracture of the soul. And our sources take us directly into Genesis chapter 3 for this.
So, the fall of man, the garden, the tree, the the fruit.
Exactly. But we really need to look past the sort of, Sunday school reduction of this story. Genesis 3 details a cosmic tragedy.
It's not just about an apple.
No, not at all. When Adam and Eve chose to disobey God and eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, it wasn't just a matter of breaking an arbitrary rule about diet. It was a declaration of autonomy.
They were trying to be their own gods.
Precisely. It was humanity saying, we no longer want to be dependent on the source of life. We want to define reality for ourselves. And the immediate result of that rebellion was the introduction of spiritual death.
So it's like severing an umbilical cord, the life source is just cut off. And what's fascinating to me is how the text describes the psychological fallout from this. The very first symptom of this spiritual death isn't malicious behavior or violence.
Right, they don't immediately start fighting.
No. Right after they eat the fruit, what happens? Genesis says the eyes of both of them were opened and they realized they were naked. They experienced shame.
Yes. For the first time in human existence, there is a consciousness of vulnerability and defectiveness.
Which didn't exist before.
Right. The mechanism of sin fundamentally warped their perception. Before the fracture, they were fully known and fully loved by God with nothing to hide. But the moment the connection is severed, their immediate instinct is self-preservation through concealment.
They hear the sound of the Lord walking in the garden, and they literally hide among the trees.
It's heartbreaking, really.
It is. The progression is devastating. It goes from a severed connection to immediate shame, to deep-seated fear, to hiding from the Creator. And that pattern, shame, fear, hiding, it has essentially been the default operating system of the human race ever since.
And this is the exact origin of the God-shaped hole. Sin knocked humanity entirely out of alignment with its essential nature. In fact, the psychological and spiritual literature refers to this as an existential phantom limb syndrome.
A phantom limb. Like when an amputee loses an arm, but their nervous system still registers the sensation of fingers itching or aching.
Precisely. The physical limb is gone, but the brain's map of the body still expects it to be there. Humanity has lived with an existential phantom limb ever since Eden.
So we feel the absence.
Yes, we feel that something massive and essential is missing. Our soul instinctively recognizes the void because our spiritual DNA remembers the connection, even if our conscious modern mind cannot articulate what exactly we lost.
Think about how this manifests in your own life. Think about the last time you achieved a major milestone.
No, this is a great example.
You got the promotion you'd been working toward for 5 years. You finally bought the house. Your physical, material needs were completely secure.
Everything looks perfect on paper.
Right. You're sitting on your new couch, watching a great show, and out of nowhere, this heavy, hollow wave of restlessness just washes over you. You look around at everything you've built and think, is this it? Is this all there is?
Yeah, that is the phantom limb acting up.
It's wild how common that feeling is.
It really is. It's the realization of the fish that it has been removed from the water. And because the sensation of that void is so desperately agonizing, humanity refuses to just sit still and endure it.
We have to do something about it.
Right. The psychological desperation of feeling incomplete drives us to urgently bandage the fracture. If we don't have access to the infinite, we scramble to find finite substitutes to cram into the abyss, just to numb the ache.
Which introduces one of the most tragic patterns in human history, honestly. The desperate attempt to fill the void with substitutes.
It's a universal struggle.
The biblical sources call this the era of broken cisterns, or spiritual adultery in modernity. If we want to see a case study of someone who pushed this to the absolute limit, we have to look at the Old Testament book of Ecclesiastes.
Oh, absolutely. Ecclesiastes is essentially the philosophical memoir of King Solomon.
And he's the perfect guy for this.
He really is, because Solomon is the perfect test subject for this experiment. He had access to literally everything. He wasn't restricted by budget, by laws, or by physical limitations.
Right. If anyone could test the hypothesis that earthly things can fill the human soul, it was him.
He had the resources to try it all.
You read Ecclesiastes, and he details his methodology. He pursued unlimited wealth, amassing silver and gold. He pursued massive architectural and agricultural projects, building palaces, planting vineyards, designing irrigation systems.
He tried pleasure, too.
Yeah, he pursued sensuality, entertainment, and intellectual philosophy. He basically cornered the market on human achievement.
Yet, after running this comprehensive audit of human experience, his conclusion is a single haunting refrain repeated throughout the book. He says, "Vanity of vanities, all is vanity."
It's so bleak.
Well, the original Hebrew word he uses is hevel, which translates to vapor or smoke or a breath.
A vapor. That is such a visceral image.
It really paints a picture.
You can see vapor, you can smell it, but the moment you try to close your fist around it to hold it, there's nothing in your hand. Solomon surveys his massive empire and says it's just a chasing after the wind.
But he doesn't just complain about the emptiness, he actually diagnoses the root cause.
Oh, right, in chapter 3.
Yes, in Ecclesiastes 3, verse 11, he writes a profound truth. He says God has set eternity in the human heart.
That verse is the key to understanding the God-shaped hole. God inscribed a longing for the infinite into the very structure of human consciousness.
Exactly.
Therefore, mathematically and spiritually, you just cannot fill an eternal hole with temporary things.
It's the chalice full of dirt all over again.
It is. But despite this ancient wisdom, we keep trying, and God calls this behavior out directly through the prophets.
There's a very specific passage about this.
Yeah, there is a fascinating passage in Jeremiah chapter 2, verse 13, where God issues an indictment against his people. He says, "My people have committed 2 sins. They have forsaken me, the spring of living water, and have dug their own cisterns, broken cisterns that cannot hold water."
The dual nature of the tragedy there is so striking.
How do you mean?
Well, the first sin is the rejection of the true source. They walk away from an overflowing natural spring of living water. The second sin is the labor of their rebellion.
They actually put work into it.
Right. Humans don't just sit in the desert and remain empty. We actively, exhaustingly labor to carve out substitutes. We dig cisterns into the rock.
But they're flawed.
Exactly. Because anything we create apart from God is fundamentally defective. The cisterns are cracked. They promise to hold water. They look like they should satisfy our thirst. But the water always seeps out into the dirt, leaving us dry again.
I want to look at how this plays out culturally, because idolatry is a word we usually associate with, ancient people bowing down to a golden calf.
Sure, that's the classic image.
But the sources define idolatry much more broadly. It is anything substituted for God. It is whatever you look to for your ultimate security, meaning, or identity.
Throughout history, and especially in our modern era, we see humanity digging these broken cisterns on a massive scale.
What does that look like today?
Politically, people look to their nation-state, their political party, or military alliances to provide ultimate security and a sense of righteousness. We elevate politicians to the status of saviors.
We really do.
Socially and emotionally, we turn to career status, wealth accumulation, romantic relationships, and sensuality. We demand that our spouses or our bank accounts bear the weight of providing infinite meaning.
And the prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Hosea, Ezekiel, they weren't just angry moralists complaining about bad behavior.
No, they were identifying a spiritual crisis.
They were exposing these pursuits as spiritual adultery. That is a heavy, emotionally charged term. It implies that humanity is covenantally bound to the Creator, and when we seek our ultimate fulfillment in our stock portfolio or in the validation of strangers on social media, we are essentially cheating on the divine with a lesser abusive lover.
It's a powerful metaphor.
The prophets constantly warn the rebellious that building a life on a broken cistern won't just leave you disappointed, it will ultimately destroy you. If you rely on a cracked pot in the desert, you die of thirst.
It's a matter of spiritual survival.
But I have to push back here for a minute.
And what's the objection?
Because this all sounds very logical theologically, but when you look at reality, there are plenty of billionaires, celebrities, and secular people who seem perfectly happy.
That's true on the surface.
I think about famous athletes, people who have won multiple championships, who reach the absolute pinnacle of their profession. Some of them publicly admit there's got to be more than this, but society as a whole keeps doubling down.
We never learn the lesson.
Right. If it is so incredibly obvious that money and power don't satisfy, why do we keep sacrificing our lives to get them? Are we just projecting this theological void onto people?
It's not projection, it's actually an observation of the psychology of addiction, which is what the void creates.
Addiction? How so?
The hunger inside the human soul is so intense that when we reject the true God, we are forced to gorge ourselves on counterfeits just to numb the pain. The reason society keeps doubling down is that our modern lifestyle is expertly engineered to hyper-accelerate these false pursuits.
Oh, with technology and ads.
Exactly. We are bombarded constantly by algorithms, advertising, and cultural narratives promising that the next purchase, the next swipe, the next promotion will finally be the thing that satisfies. The modern world is quite literally a factory of broken cisterns.
Wow. It's like drinking salt water when you're dying of dehydration.
That's a perfect way to put it.
It mimics the sensation of quenching your thirst for about 3 seconds, but the chemical reality is that it accelerates your death. You just get thirstier.
You're just doing more damage.
But this desperate need to figure out our existence isn't just limited to emotional coping mechanisms or political tribalism. It has actually driven some of humanity's greatest intellectual and scientific achievements.
That's a really important pivot.
Because the void is real, our restlessness makes us look up at the stars and look deep into our own brain chemistry, searching for an explanation.
And this brings us to a critical transition in our deep dive, the secular search. Because the God-shaped hole is an objective reality of human nature, it doesn't disappear just because someone rejects theology.
Right, you still have the hole.
Exactly. Those who operate from a strictly materialistic worldview simply spend massive amounts of capital, time, money, and brilliant intellectual energy trying to decode the void using other disciplines.
So if religion identifies the hole, what happens when society strips God out of the equation? Suddenly, humanity has to find a way to explain this massive psychological void using only philosophy and microscopes.
Let's look at the philosophers first.
Okay, let's do it.
In the 20th century, you have the rise of the existentialists, brilliant thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus.
Very cheerful guys.
Right, very heavy stuff. They looked honestly at the human condition, and they absolutely recognized the void, but they didn't call it a God-shaped hole. They called it the absurd.
The absurd.
Camus defined the absurd as the fundamental, irreconcilable conflict between the human tendency to seek inherent meaning in life and the silent, cold material universe that seems to offer absolutely none.
So we want meaning, but the universe is just rocks and gas.
Exactly. In his essay, The Myth of Sisyphus, he compares the human condition to a man condemned by the gods to roll a massive boulder up a hill, only to watch it roll back down for eternity.
Just pointless labor.
For the secular existentialist, that is life. It's a desperate search for meaning in a universe that doesn't care about you.
Then you have Friedrich Nietzsche in the late 19th century, who famously declared, "God is dead."
A very misunderstood quote.
It is.
Yeah.
People often misunderstand that quote. He wasn't celebrating. He was issuing a terrifying warning.
Right.
In his Parable of the Madman, he essentially asks, now that we have unchained the earth from its sun, where are we moving? Are we not plunging continually?
He saw the consequences.
He recognized that if you remove the creator from the cultural consciousness, the inevitable result is nihilism, the complete collapse of objective meaning.
And even going all the way back to the ancients, Plato and Aristotle were staring into the same abyss, wrestling with the idea of a transcendent, unmoved mover, because the material world simply wasn't enough to explain human reality.
And when philosophy reaches its limits, the hard sciences step in.
Bird measure the void.
Yeah. We spent billions of dollars studying cosmology, building massive telescopes to look back to the Big Bang, trying to figure out exactly where we came from and why there is something rather than nothing. We study evolutionary biology to map our physical origins.
But the place where the scientific struggle becomes most acute is in neuroscience.
Specifically regarding what researchers actually call the hard problem of consciousness. Let's break down why it's called the hard problem, because this is fascinating. Materialistic science is incredible at mapping mechanics.
They can see exactly what the brain is doing.
They can put a person in an fMRI machine, show them a picture of their child, and map the exact neurochemical firing of synapses. They can show you precisely which quadrant of the brain lights up when you experience love or fear or even a sense of the divine. They can explain the mechanics of the brain completely.
They can show the how. But the hard problem is that they cannot explain the why.
There is the gap.
Neuroscience cannot explain why a collection of biological atoms, wet organic tissue inside your skull, somehow develops an internal sense of self.
Like, why does it feel like anything to be alive?
Exactly. Why do physical brain processes give rise to a subjective, qualitative experience? Philosophers like Thomas Nagel have asked, what is it like to be a bat?
Right. A machine doesn't ask that.
A machine can process data, but a machine doesn't have an internal experience of being a machine. Humans are observers trapped inside bodies, yearning for an objective purpose that transcends our chemical survival. Science has no mechanism to explain the origin of the self.
And this structural blindness of science its inability to measure purpose, it creates a massive vacuum.
A huge one.
Because the human intellect absolutely demands an explanation for our origins and our consciousness. When secular minds reject the biblical narrative, they are forced to invent entirely new transcendent frameworks.
Which leads to one of the most wild cultural phenomena of our time.
Simulation theory.
Yes. Simulation theory, popularized by philosopher Nick Bostrom and heavily embraced by tech billionaires in Silicon Valley, is the idea that we might be living inside a highly advanced computer simulation created by a superior, technologically advanced civilization.
That sounds like sci-fi.
It does. Bostrom argues that if any civilization can reach a point of technological maturity where they can run ancestor simulations, there would be billions of simulated realities and only one base reality. Therefore, statistically, we are almost certainly in a simulation.
You know, when I first read about this in the sources, it hit me.
Yeah.
This sounds exactly like religion.
It really does.
It is a modern technostic cry for a creator. If you strip away the high-tech vocabulary of servers and code, what is the simulation hypothesis actually saying?
It's saying we didn't happen by accident.
Right. It's saying that reality is not what it appears on the surface. It's saying the universe was intelligently designed and built by a superior intellect for purposes we cannot fully comprehend. It's acknowledging that there was a higher level of existence beyond the physical one we inhabit.
From a theological perspective, it is extraordinarily revealing. It demonstrates that even if you completely reject the Bible, your intellect will still construct a framework where you are dependent upon a sovereign intellect who controls the operating system from an external dimension.
It's unavoidable.
Compare simulation theory to the biblical text. Colossians chapter 1, verse 17 says that in Christ all things hold together. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 3 states, by faith, we understand that the universe was formed at God's command so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible.
Simulation theory is literally a modern rewrite of Genesis.
It's the same core concept in different clothes.
The modern mind is so blinded by its own data, so obsessed with technology, that it is doing intellectual backflips to explain a sovereign intellect controlling the universe without ever having to use the terrifying word God.
They'd prefer a programmer.
They would rather believe that we are digital avatars trapped inside a cosmic supercomputer being run by alien teenagers than accept the terrifying loneliness of a universe without a creator.
It is the God-shaped hole speaking through the vocabulary of the 21st century. It proves that the human mind cannot tolerate a purely random material existence.
But, you know, if I'm a secular listener, I might say, hold on. Science is supposed to give us objective, empirical facts. Religion requires a leap of faith. Why should we pivot from the scientific method back to ancient scripture just because science hasn't answered the consciousness question yet? Just give more time, right?
That is a fair objection, but it really misunderstands the epistemological horizon of science.
Boundary of what it can know.
Yes. Science is the study of the natural, observable, material world. It is the best tool we have for understanding how gravity works or how to cure diseases.
We definitely need science.
But if the human soul was created by a transcendent God, a being who exists outside of time, space, and matter, then the deepest truths of our existence fundamentally reside outside the observable material universe.
You can't put that under a microscope.
Exactly. If our greatest telescopes and our most advanced philosophical frameworks cannot capture the ultimate lathe, why, we have to eventually practice epistemological humility and admit the limitations of laboratory science.
Epistemological humility. The realization that you just cannot confine the creator of the universe to a petri dish.
Exactly. And this is a foundational biblical truth. Humanity's search for the answer is frequently frustrated because we attempt to drag God into our local material laboratories.
We want to test him.
We try to measure him with algorithms, or we demand that he justify himself within our limited rational structures. We want a God who fits neatly onto a spreadsheet.
But Scripture explicitly shuts down that kind of arrogance. In Isaiah 55, verses 8 and 9, God speaks through the prophet and says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways."
It's a clear statement of separation.
And centuries later, the Apostle Paul echoes this in Romans chapter 11, verse 33, writing, "Oh, the depth of the riches of the wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable his judgments and his paths beyond tracing out."
These verses aren't just poetry flourishes, they are statements of ontological difference. The gap between divine cognition and human cognition is not merely quantitative.
It's not just a matter of degree.
Right. It's not just that God knows a trillion more facts than we do. The gap is qualitative. God's mode of knowing, his perspective on reality, completely transcends the categories that human rationality employs.
The sources use an amazing analogy to illustrate this gap. Imagine a two-dimensional universe, like a flat piece of paper.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
And there are 2D creatures living on this paper. They understand length and width perfectly. Now imagine a three-dimensional object, like a solid sphere, descends and passes through that flat piece of paper.
What do they see?
Well, the 2D creature can only perceive a flat circle that magically grows and shrinks. They are structurally incapable of comprehending the 3D reality of the sphere.
That makes perfect sense.
In the same way, human beings, confined to linear time and three-dimensional material space, cannot fully perceive the eternal. Our brains literally lack the hardware to fully process God.
That structural limitation is profoundly explored in the book of Job. After enduring unimaginable suffering, Job demands an audience with God.
He wants his day in court.
He wants a rational explanation for his pain. And God finally responds to Job from a whirlwind in chapters 38 through 41. But God doesn't give Job a theological essay on the problem of evil.
No, he goes a completely different direction.
Instead, God asks Job a relentless series of questions about the architecture of the cosmos. He says, "Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Can you bind the chains of the Pleiades? Do you know the laws of the heavens?"
God essentially overwhelms Job's tiny human rational framework.
Completely.
He doesn't answer the why of Job's specific suffering. He demands calibrated humility by revealing the vastness of his own wisdom.
Precisely. A God small enough to be fully comprehended and explained by the human mind would not be large enough to be genuinely God.
That's a great point.
He would just be a slightly smarter human. The most honest scientists and the greatest theologians have always acknowledged this mystery. The realization here is that God is not hiding to frustrate us. He is preserving the appropriate posture of a creature standing before its creator.
This leads to the biblical concept of deferred understanding.
Yeah. Deferred understanding. Meaning, there are things we just aren't supposed to know yet. Deuteronomy chapter 29, verse 29 says, "The secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things revealed belong to us and to our children forever."
We get some things, not all things.
And Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 12, "For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror, then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully."
It's important to remember that in Paul's time, mirrors weren't made of perfectly clear glass.
Right, they were pretty foggy.
They were made of polished bronze. They gave a dim, imprecise reflection. The teaching moment here, especially for believers, is incredibly encouraging.
How so?
The incompleteness of our knowledge, the fact that we still have unanswered questions, is not evidence that God is absent or that Christianity is false. It is the appropriate expected experience of a finite creature relating to an infinite creator.
It's by design.
God reveals enough for us to know him, love him, and be saved by him. What remains hidden requires us to step out of the laboratory and use a different set of tools.
Think about it like a masterpiece painting. You cannot find the artist by chemically analyzing the paint on a canvas.
No, the chemistry won't tell you that.
You can put the canvas in a lab, determine the exact chemical makeup of the oil, date the age of the linen, map the direction of every single brushstroke, but absolutely none of that empirical data will tell you who the artist is or why they painted it or who they loved.
It's measuring the wrong thing.
You can only know the artist if the artist chooses to reveal themselves to you through communication.
That is an excellent way to conceptualize it. Because empirical laboratory tools fail to detect the spiritual reality of God, God provides humanity with specific spiritual tools to tap into ultimate truth.
We have to use the right instrument.
If we want to bridge the gap and understand the void, we must use the tools designed for the soul.
And the scriptures explicitly lay out what these tools are. First, there is faith. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1 defines faith as confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see.
That's the primary tool.
Then there is trust. Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6 tell us to trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. And there is hope. Hebrews chapter 6, verse 19 calls hope an anchor for the soul, firm and secure.
Notice the common denominator of these tools.
What's that?
They all require a surrender of absolute intellectual control. They require the humility to admit that human understanding is not the ultimate arbiter of reality.
But let me play the skeptic again here.
Go for it.
If we can't fully understand God empirically, and we are told to rely on faith and trust, doesn't that just sound like a massive blind leap in the dark?
People say that all the time.
It sounds like we're abandoning logic and embracing irrationality just to make ourselves feel better about the void.
It is a vital question, and it's a critique often leveled at religion. But the answer is no. Faith is not blind irrationality. Faith is the highest form of reason acknowledging its own limits.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Think of it this way. When human reason correctly maps the universe and recognizes that reality extends beyond its measuring instruments, when we see the edge of the map, the most logical next step is openness to revelation.
So it's an informed step.
Yes. It is stepping into trust based on the solid evidence of the revealed things to carry you through the mysteries of the secret things. You trust the character of the artist based on the beauty of the painting, even if you don't understand every brushstroke.
When you frame it like that, something incredible happens to the concept of the God-shaped hole.
It changes everything.
If we realize our intellect can't bridge the gap and we embrace faith and hope, the void completely shifts its meaning. It stops being this agonizing phantom limb curse. It actually becomes a divine tool.
Yeah.
The emptiness becomes a homing beacon designed by God to guide us home.
This is the turning point in our deep dive. We shift from the diagnosis of the disease to the cure. We move into the concept of divine magnetism.
Divine magnetism.
The God-shaped hole was never intended to be a permanent state of emptiness. It is an active magnetic draw toward the Creator.
The scriptures talk about this magnetic draw constantly. Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 7, verse 7, "Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be open to you."
The void is the prompt.
The void is the very thing that compels us to knock. If we weren't empty, we would never look for the door.
Exactly.
And when Paul is speaking to the Greek philosophers at the Areopagus in Athens in Acts chapter 17, he explicitly states that God designed the times and places of humanity specifically so that they would reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any one of us.
To see how this divine magnetism plays out in human experience, we can look at specific biblical narratives that act as psychological case studies.
Give us an example.
One of the most masterful illustrations is the parable of the prodigal son in Luke chapter 15.
Let's break that story down because it perfectly maps everything we've talked about so far.
Yeah.
You have the younger son who goes to his father and essentially says, "I want my inheritance now."
He demands autonomy.
He wants the father's wealth without the father's authority. He severs the connection.
Exactly. He commits the fracture. And then he travels to a distant country and tries to fill his internal void with what the text calls wild living.
Partying, materialism.
Pure materialism. He is desperately digging broken cisterns.
But the cisterns crack. He blows all his money, a severe famine hits the land, and he ends up literally feeding pigs.
He hits the bottom.
He is so destitute and empty that he longs to fill his stomach with the pods the pigs are eating, but no one gives him anything. He hits absolute rock bottom. He experiences the total failure of earthly substitutes to provide life.
But notice what happens next. The text says, when he came to his senses,
He wakes up.
it is precisely in that moment of ultimate emptiness, when the void is screaming in agony, that he remembers his father's house. He remembers that even his father's hired servants have food to spare.
So the hunger drives him.
The void, the intense spiritual and physical hunger, is the very mechanism that drives him to repentance. The ache breaks his pride and guides him home.
And when he walks back up that road, expecting to be punished or at best made a slave, what happens?
Well, Father is waiting.
The father sees him from a long way off, is filled with compassion, runs to him, throws his arms around him, and kisses him. The father restores his identity entirely. Which brings us to another amazing case study, the story of Jesus and the Samaritan woman at the well in John chapter 4.
Oh, the woman at the well is a profound example of someone seeking to bandage the imago Dei through social and emotional substitutes.
What's her story?
She comes to draw water from a physical well in the middle of the day, likely avoiding the other women of the town because of her social shame. She has had 5 husbands, and the man she is currently living with is not her husband.
So she's looking for love in all the wrong places, literally.
Exactly. She has been trying to fill her existential void by jumping from one broken relationship to another, seeking validation and love, but ending up more fractured each time.
And Jesus meets her exactly where she is. He asks her for a drink, breaking all the social and ethnic boundaries of the time. But then He pivots the conversation from physical thirst to spiritual thirst.
He gets to the real issue.
He tells her, everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life.
In that moment, Jesus is directly addressing the God-shaped hole. He identifies himself as the living water, the exact opposite of the broken cisterns in Jeremiah.
He's the real deal.
He is explicitly stating that he, his presence, and his spirit is the only substance with the correct shape to permanently fill the internal vacuum of the human soul.
Throughout the gospel accounts, Jesus is portrayed as the ultimate, exclusive answer to this deepest human emptiness.
We see it over and over.
In John chapter 6, verse 35, he addresses a massive crowd that he had just miraculously fed with loaves of bread. And he elevates their perspective, saying, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty.
And in John chapter 14.
Yeah, in John 14, verse 6, he tells his disciples, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And all the way at the end of the biblical narrative, in Revelation 21 and 22, he declares himself the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, the one who gives water without cost from the spring of the water of life to anyone who is thirsty.
What is profoundly beautiful, and what we really must highlight, is the character of God revealed in this entire process.
Yeah, it's not a scolding.
Not at all. When the Creator confronts the empty, wandering, rebellious human soul, his approach is not one of harsh, judgmental superiority. It is marked by extraordinary grace, mercy, love, and forgiveness.
That is so vital to understand. God doesn't stand over our broken cisterns with a megaphone screaming, I told you so.
No, he doesn't shame us for being thirsty.
Look at the prophet Hosea. In Hosea chapter 2, verse 14, God is speaking about unfaithful Israel, a nation that has been chasing false gods and ruining itself. And God says, therefore, I am now going to allure her. I will lead her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her. Speak tenderly.
It's an incredible image of grace. Or look at Isaiah 55, where God issues this beautiful, urgent invitation. Come, all you who are thirsty, come to the waters, and you who have no money, come, buy and eat. Come, buy wine and milk without money and without cost. Why spend money on what is not bread, and your labor on what does not satisfy?
It's an invitation born entirely of love.
God is pleading with humanity to stop exhausting themselves on things that will leave them empty.
You see this deep intimacy in the Psalms as well. Psalm 23 declares, the Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. The void is completely filled.
The phantom limb is healed.
In Psalm 63, David writes from the desert, You, God, are my God. Earnestly I seek you, I thirst for you, my whole being longs for you, in a dry and parched land where there is no water. And Psalm 139 acknowledges that we cannot escape God's presence because we are intimately woven together by him.
The overarching message is that the void is ultimately a doorway, an opportunity for God's overwhelming grace to restore the broken imago Dei.
And for anyone listening who considers themselves a believer in Jesus Christ, our sources offer a deeply encouraging theological reality here.
Very encouraging.
The ache you feel, that restless longing that sometimes flares up even on your best days, is not a sign that your faith is broken or that God has abandoned you.
No, not at all.
It is the absolute proof of your divine origin. It is the evidence of your capacity for the infinite. It is a homing beacon reminding you that you are a citizen of another kingdom and you are simply not home yet.
That's a beautiful way to summarize it.
I want to sort of synthesize this incredible sweeping journey we've been on today.
We covered a lot of ground.
We started at the very architecture of the soul, examining the imago Dei, where God's breath mixed with dust made us unique among all creatures. The only animal on earth burdened and blessed with the capacity to ask why.
We explored the cosmic tragedy of the fall in Genesis 3, too.
Right, the spiritual fracture that severed our connection to the Creator and introduced the agonizing phantom limb of our existential angst.
We analyzed how humanity desperately attempts to bandage that fracture through what the prophets called spiritual adultery.
We construct broken cisterns out of wealth, power, political tribalism, and sensuality. Things that promise ultimate satisfaction but inevitably leak, leaving us thirsty and exhausted.
And we watched how secular science and philosophy, having discarded theology, spend billions trying to decode our restlessness.
Inventing high-tech creation myths like simulation theory to explain the magnificent design of the universe, while stubbornly avoiding the designer.
We recognize the absolute limits of the laboratory, that the finite human mind cannot fully comprehend the infinite God.
We saw that God, in his mercy, doesn't leave us in the dark, but gives us the spiritual tools of faith, trust, and hope to bridge the gap.
And finally, we saw that the void is actually a divine magnetism, a thirst that finds its absolute, ultimate crystallization and eternal fulfillment in the person of Jesus Christ, the bread of life and the living water.
The God-shaped hole is not a symptom of emptiness. It is the undeniable proof of our purpose.
It points directly to what we were made for.
Which brings me to a final, lingering thought for you to mull over today. Think about human biology for just a second. Every single innate, natural desire you possess corresponds to a real object in the universe that can satisfy it.
Okay, yeah.
You feel physical hunger because a thing called food exists. You feel physical thirst because water exists. You feel the heavy urge to sleep because sleep exists. You desire companionship and love because other humans exist.
The desire proves the object.
So if every single natural desire corresponds to something in the real world that can fulfill it, what does it mean that you possess a persistent, inescapable, agonizing desire for infinite meaning and transcendent purpose that absolutely nothing in this physical universe can permanently satisfy?
That's the question.
Doesn't the very existence of that infinite hunger prove that the infinite bread must exist somewhere else?
That is the ultimate question of the human soul, waiting for an answer.
Thank you so much for joining us on this extensive deep dive. Keep asking, keep seeking, and keep knocking.